사시 복희 주신 매덕장 리라블링시인대겸파디 성계 신두미 태그와기 드로픈 남다 신라주파쇼 Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamninyatayami Sanghe Jidam Zogi Shoknamla Janchu Bardu Dakni Gyapsuchi Daki Jinyen Gipe Sanam Ki Drola Penchir Sanghe Druparsho Sanghe Jidam Saki Choknamla Janchu Bardu Dakni Gyapsuchi Daki Jinyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sanghe Druparsho Sanghe Jidam Soki Choknamla Janchu Bardu Dakni Gyapsuchi Daki Jinyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sanghe Druparsho.
So please sit comfortably for a few minutes of meditation to try to help calm the mind and shift gears and get into a different space than you've been in throughout the busyness of the day. So sit comfortably with your spine straight and your eyes mostly closed or fully closed. Check and see that your torso is level in one plane. And simply be aware of your breath, the sensation of your breath as it passes the tips of your nostrils. Count 21 rounds of breathing, beginning with an exhalation, completing with inhalation as one round. Please reflect upon your day and quality of your mind throughout the day. Look back upon the last hour and check in and see how much of the last hour your mind was calm and relaxed and peaceful and happy. What was the content of your mind in terms of happiness or unhappiness or peace or disruption over the last hour? What was the state of your mind? What was it like? Try to get a handle on that. Think about the period since lunch. How much of that time was your mind turbulent or disrupted, and how much of that time was it sweet and peaceful and calm and happy? Try to really get a sense of feeling state of your mind during that time. And now check in when you woke up in the morning, first part of the day. What was the quality of your mind then? Try to imagine what it would be like to go through your morning with a completely peaceful, delightful, happy, peaceful mind. Try to see yourself doing that. Try to get a clear picture of it. Doing those same things with a different mind state. Similarly, whatever the most difficult periods of the day were, try to see yourself in those circumstances with a very calm, joyous mind, going through those same events. So, try to think of a being who has a completely peaceful, pure, joyous mind, and ask them to join you here. Invite them in your mind, whatever holy being or enlightened being or teacher you might think of that has a pure, established, happy state of mind. Visualize them in front of you or feel the presence with you. You can see them glowing in light, sitting in the space in front of you. And in your heart, ask them for their blessing to help you to train and develop your mind to be this way. You can feel them come close and join you, either beside you or above your crown as a small, radiant figure of light. Giving you their blessing and happily helping you. So homage to all the holy beings who are here. Thank you for coming. Tonight we are doing the second half of the Buddhist Refuge class, of course. We did the first 10 hours, I suppose, last week. Tonight we're going to do the next 10 hours of the original course in 2 hours. Slight condensation, right? So we're going to zip through it, but please don't hesitate to ask about anything you'd like to, or anything that you'd like to go into more detail on, more information, right? We're mainly going to talk about nirvana tonight. I have to say it was a little bit weird preparing for class. When I prepare for class, I usually I listened to the original teachings by Geshe Michael, Holy Geshe Michael, my teacher, 15, 16 years ago. So I went back to listen to his teaching this class 16 years ago. He wasn't teaching it, I was teaching it. So it was very strange to like turn on and hear myself teaching. It was a little anticlimactic, I have to say, you know? It was like...
Were you any good?
Yeah, we got a lot of applause. Actually, it was pretty good.
Can you do better now?
I don't think so. Damn. Now what?
That's lovely, actually.
You know, it was strange though. It's something where it's like listening to myself teach. I was just like, I don't want to listen to this guy. It's like I wasn't really interested in listening to myself. You know, it's very interesting. It's like, whatever. So anyway, we'll see how it goes tonight. So we're going to talk about nirvana. This is the second half of Buddhist Refuge, and we're talking about nirvana and how you get there, and why you want to get to nirvana, and what nirvana is all about. What's the difference between nirvana and Buddhahood, right? So let me turn up the fans. I totally misdressed for the occasion today.
Turn
So,
on?
up, yeah, up. Yeah, some airflow. It's like I totally didn't call it. So anyway, we talked about last week. We started talking about the 5 Buddhist paths, right? And we talked about if you pursue the 5 paths, if you're successful in your spiritual career in pursuing the 5 paths, it leads to nirvana or enlightenment, right? Depending upon what kind of practitioner you are. Remember we talked about refuge last week, different kinds of refuge, we talked about 5 different kinds of Buddhist refuge, right? So depending upon your motivation, lowest motivation to be considered a Buddhist is to want to pursue some spiritual practice to avoid suffering rebirths, you know, thinking that after you die there's something next, something comes after you die, this isn't the end, and fearing that there are lower suffering realms, and therefore pursuing a spiritual practice to avoid your next life being a lower suffering realm. So that's sort of the lowest motivation practitioner in Buddhism, right? And someone who's practicing with that level of motivation goes through the 5 Buddhist paths. Anybody remember what they are? Huh?
Getting real renunciation.
What's
I only
it
have
called?
the first 3.
Oh, we'll take the first 3. What are they
The
called?
last 2 are question mark.
All right.
I just wrote get real renunciation.
What's that called?
Accumulation. Okay, stuff.
Path of accumulation. It's the
Okay.
first path.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, then preparation,
Path
which
of
is
preparation.
understanding emptiness and ultimate reality. And then the third one I have is the path of seeing,
Mhm.
in parentheses, direct experience of emptiness.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Etc., etc. Right? So, I mean, basically, the 5 paths are in one's spiritual career. You go through these 5 different paths. There are 5 different realizations, 5 different levels of realization one gets. And when you get to the end of these 5 paths, then you reach enlightenment, nirvana or enlightenment, right? So, if you have a motivation to simply practice for yourself, if you have the lowest motivation, or which is to avoid suffering rebirth, or a middling motivation, which is to achieve nirvana for yourself, when you come to the end of the 5 paths, then you attain nirvana. So if you're lowest scope or middle scope, you attain nirvana at the end of your spiritual career, if you will. Yeah.
We went over 3 of the 5 paths. Is the 4th or the 5th one the path of no more learning?
Yeah, that was the et cetera, et cetera.
The 5th one is the path of no more learning. The 4th one is the path of habituation.
Yeah.
Path of habituation.
So
Okay.
So the first path, so this is, if you're going to do a Buddhist spiritual practice, you start off your spiritual career with what's called the path of accumulation. And it's a little bit of a misnomer. You're basically accumulating virtue, you're practicing being virtuous, right? And depending upon your motivation, if you're higher scope or higher level of motivation, you have a motivation to want to benefit other beings. You're thinking about all other suffering beings, and you have a bodhisattva motivation. And so if one has a bodhisattva's motivation, then one has a different goal or endpoint at the end of their 5 paths. So the 5 paths are accumulation, you're accumulating virtue, and if you're Mahayana practitioner, bodhisattva motivation, you're also collecting the causes and the virtue to succeed in that practice. So, and then the second path, the path of preparation, you're preparing to experience deeper levels of reality, higher reality, which is called emptiness in Buddhism. So you're studying ultimate reality and higher reality intensely. You are meditating, you're practicing, and then on the third path you have a direct communion or experience of ultimate reality and highest reality. And on the fourth path, you're using what you saw to change the nature of your being. It's called the path of habituation. You're re-habituating yourself. And the fifth path is the path called the path of no more learning, where you attain your goal, which is either nirvana or Buddhahood, depending upon your motivation, right? If you have a lower motivation, if your goal is to get out of suffering for yourself, then you attain personal nirvana. And if you have a motivation to help all living beings, to help end the suffering of all living beings, then you come to full enlightenment, right? So, just a quick overview. Those are the 5 paths. And there's a terminological thing here. When people talk about getting enlightened, in some systems, for example, if you're a Hinayana Buddhist, they'll talk about attaining nirvana as becoming enlightened. So you just have to be aware in your own mind when you're reading this stuff and you're hearing people speak about it, that someone could say, oh yeah, I got enlightened, and they could be referring to nirvana. So typically we say fully enlightened, right? If it's referring to attaining Buddhahood. So the idea is attaining Buddhahood is nirvana with a little more. So if you attain nirvana, you attain your personal liberation. But if you attain full enlightenment or Buddhahood, then you have that same personal liberation plus the capacity to help and benefit every other living being, based on that different motivation, right? So it's like that, okay? So how do you even know when you reach the first path, right? Path of accumulation, which is sort of your first step, if you will, your first launching pad as a Buddhist practitioner. You're accumulating virtue, you're trying to get some sense of my spiritual life and my spiritual practice is important, right? So, of course, there's a definition. There's always a definition in Buddhism. And it is, you unceasingly, day and night, think of nothing else except being free of suffering. So, to even begin to step onto the first path, that's not the right way to say it. Let me take it back. To have renunciation, because we all start wherever we are, right? I'm like a schmuck, and I don't know anything, and I want to be a good person, so I'll just try to be a good person, right? And that's fine, that's great. And I'm on the first path, right? So, how do I know when I've realized or attained the first path? How do I know when I have the realization of the first path of attaining renunciation? And basically, it's when our motivation is shifted from ordinary life motivation. What's ordinary life motivation? I want a car, I want more clothes, I want more shoes. I'm going to spend my time and energy thinking about, what I'm going to do today and where I'm going to go and who I'm going to see. So when you achieve true renunciation, you're naturally and spontaneously, day and night, thinking, I want my spiritual goals. I want my spiritual realizations. I want higher satisfactions. I want higher happinesses. I don't want the limited happinesses and the limited pleasures and you know, and goodies that I can get in an ordinary life. So it's really a shifting of one's way of being, and it's really a shifting of one's way of thinking, to thinking that all I care about are my spiritual goals. All I care about are my spiritual realizations. And it's this sort of natural, you know, what comes up in your mind naturally, right? I mean, if you think about what just naturally arises in my mind. Well, what's for dinner? You know, what's at the movies? You know, who am I going to go on a date with next month? Whatever, right? So when one has true feeling of renunciation, when one realizes renunciation, one is not thinking about those things. One is just spontaneously and naturally thinking, you know, I want the highest goals. I want the highest satisfactions, the highest pleasures, the highest results that I can attain. You know, the best that I can have for myself. Okay? So unceasingly, day and night, feeling like I don't want anything else except to be free of suffering. You know, I'm tired of a job, which is a problem. I'm tired of a relationship, which is a problem. I'm tired of all the problems of the suffering world, and I just want to be free of suffering, and that's my main motivation, and that's where I'm coming from, and that's where I'm at. So that's it. And then path of preparation, preparing to study emptiness, right? Preparing to see emptiness directly, studying emptiness, studying intellectually, right? Which is just a lot of hours, dozens, scores, hundreds of hours. Come in, just put the door. You're probably trying to be discreet, but I've blown that, right? Come on in. There's a chair over here. There's a cushion over here. Please be comfortable.
There's two. She's got her puppy. That's
See, everybody likes puppy.
Last life as a dog.
That's right, we're going to give that dog some good imprints, right?
Absolutely.
That's what happens if you come back as a dog with good karma.
That's right, that's right. Yeah, good mommy and lots of pets and Dharma class, right? Yeah. All right. A lot of friends. So the path of preparation is preparing to see emptiness directly. You know, you just have to spend hundreds of hours studying emptiness, you know, and the intellectual pursuit of emptiness and what it is and what it isn't, and understanding as much as you can the nature of ultimate reality and what ultimate reality is all about, right? So, and the paths overlap, right? So it's not that one can be on the first and second path at the same time, no problem. You know, one cannot have renunciation. Like, how many people, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. If you don't have renunciation completely, you can still be studying emptiness. We'll say it that way, okay? No problem. So, and then the third path, the path of seeing, is a direct perception of emptiness. And it's an extremely important accomplishment, right? It's the most important accomplishment, right? Because then you're guaranteed to become enlightened within a specific period of time, within a finite period of time. Once one sees emptiness directly, you're guaranteed to be on the way out of suffering. You know, you're guaranteed to have a definite end to your suffering. And up to the time one sees emptiness or ultimate reality, there is no definitive end to one's suffering. You know, it's considered to be infinite. You know, the rebirths and suffering realms is considered to be infinite until one has this realization. And when you see emptiness, you see the day of your enlightenment. You know how many lives you have left, that you won't have any heavy suffering in those lives. So, and in that process, one's mind actually, one goes into deep meditation, and one's mind actually travels to a different realm, to a higher realm, and perceives a different level of reality in a different realm. And we're going to talk about it later. The fourth path is path of habituation, and you use the experience, you use the insight or the realization of higher reality to change your behavior, to change how you live, to change who you are, to change the nature of your being, to basically rehabituate yourself and recondition ourselves based upon what we saw in this higher level of reality. It's like saying, oh, now I know how things really are, and I know what I'm really supposed to be doing, and what kind of being I really am, and how I'm really supposed to be living. Right? So seeing emptiness doesn't get you enlightened right away. But it provides you key insights and key awareness and key understanding to know what you have to do. So, and then that's the fourth path. The fourth path is a path of habituation. We're all habituated to one thing or another, right? I mean, habituated to smoking or dessert or work or whatever. And we have to re-habituate to be the kind of being that we want to be, the being free of suffering, an enlightened being which is happy all the time. So one uses the realization and the experience of the path of seeing emptiness directly to re-habituate one's way of thinking and one's way of behaving and one's way of living, so that one says, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to be this kind of being, I'm going to do that kind of being. I'm going to be that kind of being. Basically paying attention and doing the work you need to become enlightened, or to reach nirvana, depending upon the motivation, right? You see emptiness, it results in either attaining personal nirvana and liberation, or becoming fully enlightened for the benefit of all beings, right? And then that's the path of no more learning, the fifth path, right? So tonight we're not talking about full enlightenment, really. We're talking primarily about nirvana, personal nirvana. And when one attains nirvana or achieves nirvana, one achieves a permanent cessation of all suffering, right? All mental afflictions. 24 hours a day, forever, your mind is happy. Extremely happy, blissed out happy, right? So, I mean, I think it's hard for us to really wrap our mind around what it would be like to just feel good all the time. I mean, I think most of us have some kind of addiction to having problems in our mind, and we're not even aware of it. It's just like, I need to worry, or I need to, have turbulence, or I need to be anxious, or I need, whatever, right? I mean, it's like to even think about what would my mind be like if I was just buzzed out all the time. I mean, it's hard to even just kind of frame that, right? I mean, I can't really frame it, It's like, what would I be like as a person if I was just happy all the time? My wife would like it, my kids would like it, right? I'd like it, I'm sure. Just hard to get a picture, hard to bring that into clear focus, on a conceptual level somehow. But that's the goal. That's what we're talking about, in some kind of really high ecstatic way, right? I mean, with both personal nirvana and full enlightenment, we've eliminated all personal suffering on every level. We are totally blissed out, exceptional bliss all the time, regardless of what we're engaged in and what we're doing, what we're not doing, right? And so, again, the difference between nirvana, personal nirvana, and full enlightenment is exact same blissful state, right? I mean, the mind experiences everything as bliss. Anything anyone says, you hear as bliss. It doesn't matter if they say, hey, stupid, it's still blissful. There is no affliction. Because we can say, you're like the ugliest person I ever saw, and I hate you. And it's like the mind's totally blissed out. It's like no problem, right? I mean, think about the thing that annoys you the most, right, in your life. And somebody could be doing that all day long and you just be happy, right? Right? So, in a very like ecstatic way, right? I mean, think of your like highest ecstatic moments and you'd be like that times 100. When people are doing the worst thing you can imagine, right? So this is nirvana. This is the state. This is the idea of the blissful state of nirvana, right? In the same state, whether it's nirvana or full enlightenment, it's just that full enlightenment has the additional aspect of helping other beings with that mental state, right? Okay. So that's the idea. Nirvana plus activity helping all beings, right? So we're going to talk about mental afflictions, right, which are called nundrifts. Please say nundrift.
Nundrift.
I'm not a Tibetan person, but I think it's good to just plant some seeds now and then. So mental afflictions are anything which disturbs the mind, right? Anything which causes your mind to not be happy. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be any sensory input at all, right? It could simply be a thought, without any sensory input, where you're simply not happy, right? So I'll give you the definition. The definition is in Tibetan. In Tibetan, nirvana is nyangde. You say nyangde?
Nyangde.
And then nirvana is the permanent cessation. This is technical definition. The permanent cessation in which one has eliminated mental affliction obstacles in their entirety due to one's individual analysis. And scripture, As Buddhists, they like to be precise. Each word has an important meaning. So we'll go over it. So, what is individual analysis, right? I mean, what is a mental affliction obstacle? So, I mean, anything which disrupts your mind. Doesn't matter if it's worry, anxiety, fear, jealousy, anger. I mean, anything you can possibly think of which results in your mind not being quite happy is an obstacle, is a mental affliction. All right? Mental affliction obstacle, because it's obstructing your mind and it's peace and happiness. So I think the first part of the definition is fairly obvious, right? Permanent cessation of what? Mental afflictions, right? Because you've eliminated all of the obstacles. But what does individual analysis do to individual analysis? Individual analysis is referring to emptiness. It's referring to experiencing ultimate reality. When one experiences emptiness or ultimate reality, there's sort of a chain reaction of events which occurs. There's a standard series of events which occurs as a result of that. And so this is what it's referring to. It's in Tibetan it's Tengok, which is refers to seeing the Four Noble Truths, and sort of the colloquial Tibetan is the Four Noble Truths, which is very common and very widespread translation in Buddhism. But it's not really accurate. It's really the Four Arya Truths. Arya is someone who has perceived emptiness directly, and so these are four things that an Arya realizes after being in ultimate reality, after communing with ultimate reality, or after experiencing ultimate reality. So, what happens is that one sits down in meditation, their mind stream goes to a higher realm, and they have a direct perception of emptiness for a short period of time, 20 minutes or whatever it is, and then as they come out of that realm and come out of that experience, there's a sensation of the mind descending, and there's an extensive series of realizations which are had immediately after that, immediately after coming out of the direct perception. And so those are called Four Arya Truths, because they're four truths which they realize. I mean, so the language is quite self-evident. An Arya sees four truths and knows them to be true. And so what are they? They see that everything in this realm is suffering. Every single thing in this realm is suffering. There is no activity in this realm which is not tied up with suffering, and they see that for a fact. The second Arya truth that they see is they see that the cause of the suffering. They see the cause of every single suffering of this realm, which are mental afflictions. Our mental afflictions are the cause of every single suffering in this realm. Right? And then they see the end of the suffering, i.e. their full enlightenment. They see that it's possible to put an end to all of these sufferings by becoming fully enlightened. They see that directly. And they see the cause of that, the path to attain that, the end of suffering. Right? So these are what are typically called the Four Noble Truths. Suffering, life is suffering and it has a cause. There's an end to suffering and it has a cause. But more precisely, it's what I described. Right? So that's what individual analysis is referring to here in the definition. Analyzing the Four Arya Truths one by one as you come out of direct perception activities. Analyzing them as in realizing them, experiencing them, seeing them, thinking about them. Right? Okay. So why care about seeing emptiness directly? Right? How does seeing emptiness directly affect suffering and relate to nirvana, which is our topic tonight? Nirvana is a permanent cessation of all your sufferings, right? I mean, if we, just in a practical sense, if I say, I don't want to be unhappy anymore, I don't want to be worried anymore, I don't want to be afraid anymore, I don't want to be angry anymore, etc., etc., etc. How do I get that, right? How do I attain that? How do I accomplish that? And those are all mental afflictions. I mean, from a Buddhist perspective, those are all mental afflictions, right? All things which disturb my mind. And so I have to understand how to stop causing mental afflictions. I have to understand how to eliminate the mental afflictions from my mind. How do I eliminate all these problems and worries from my mind? Right? Where do they come from, and how do I get rid of them? Right? So that's the point, right? And so when we perceive emptiness, we have a clear, direct, pure understanding of what causes all of these afflictions and all of the sufferings that result from them. So that's why seeing emptiness is central to becoming enlightened. Without seeing emptiness, it is impossible to become enlightened. The only way to become enlightened or reach nirvana, to become enlightened or fully enlightened, is to see emptiness directly, is to perceive ultimate reality directly, right? And that's why we have to see emptiness. That's why emptiness is relevant to attaining nirvana, is because once you do it, you see where all of your mental afflictions come from. You see that your mental afflictions are the source of all your suffering and all the suffering in the world, and you see how to eliminate all of your mental afflictions. And you see the path to eliminate all of your mental afflictions, right? So, basically every time we have a thought, it causes our mind to be configured subtly in a particular way. And that's called collecting karma, or I want to say making karmic imprints, but that's not quite right. It's imprinting one's mind in a subtle way, in a subtle energetic way. So each time we have a thought, or each time we say something, or each time we do something, there is an effect upon our mind at a subtle energetic level, right? The energy at the end of the thought, or word, or deed, there's a residual energy that stays with the mind. And that is what a karmic seed is the residual energy that's left over, right? And so those residual energies, the collection of those residual energies, are the collection of our karma. They are our karmic seeds, and those latent, dormant, and active karmic seeds and energetic potentials and impulses are the functioning of our mind and perception, right? So every single time we collect these subtle energies by thinking a thought, we are creating our perceptual capacity for the future. We are creating our experience. We are collecting karmic seeds, which will result in a particular mental capacity and perception in future reality. Yes.
Don't certain conditions need to be present in order for a karmic seed to be planted? Like an
That would be
intention?
course 5. This is course 2. But yes, they do.
Because I've heard people argue like, that can't plant a bad karma because such and such and such were present. But I was always kind of feeling that anything you experience in your mind affects your mind.
So in Buddhism we say you collect 64 karmic seeds per instant,
Right.
a finger snap. So
At odds.
we're constantly collecting karma. It's just a question of whether it's virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral. So every karma is defined as the movement of the mind and what follows. Right? The mind is constantly fluctuating, constantly shifting. The mind is constantly active, never stops. Right? As long as you're sentient, which means forever. So every single time we perceive ourselves doing something, every time our mind moves, it is the expression of past seeds and energies and the collection of new seeds and energies, right? So every time we collect karmic seeds and imprint our mind, we are setting ourselves up for our future, basically. We collect these karmic seeds, and the perception of me sitting here is billions of karmic seeds ripening. It's billions and trillions of neurons and electrical impulses and energetic impulses, and vast beyond comprehension, right? So every perceptual event involves vast numbers of energetic impulses, karmic seeds ripening, okay? So we're constantly collecting karmic seeds, right? Latent energies in our mind stream. Countless trillions of them, they're available to flower and configure in different ways, right? So which energetic impulses will arise in what particular sequence in configuration, right? That is the ripening of karma. That is the ripening of karmic seeds. And so when we're talking about this, and we're talking about attaining nirvana, we want to have a mind which only has the capacity to experience everything as bliss all the time. Even if they're calling you a schmuck, right? Or whatever they're calling you, or pushing your button in your worst possible way. So one has to have a mind which functions that way. It's not magic, it's that the mind functions in a particular way and perceives the world in a particular way because it has been set up in a particular way. If this mind did not function this way, it wouldn't be perceiving this stuff. If my mind had a different perceptual bent and a different capacity, I would be perceiving something else. And so that's what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is if you're going to attain nirvana, you have to understand that it's a function of our mind. How do you get a mind of bliss? How do you get a mind which is blissful all the time? Well, you eliminate all the things in your mind which are unpleasant and cause you suffering and disrupt your mind and cause turbulence in your mind and arise of their own accord, to cause, pain and suffering when we don't want it, right? How do you do that? You stop collecting these energetic signatures or residues or karmic seeds or whatever you want to call them, which turn into mental disturbances and problems and sufferings, right? So every perception that we have is the ripening of imprints in our mind, and everything that we think and everything that we say and everything that we do is the collection of karmic seeds and energetic imprints within our mind. So it's this flow of stuff coming in and stuff going out of our mind, if you will, or mind stream. So the stuff that went in the past is floating around in there, waiting to pop, think of it as all these little. Think of it just like a simple analogy, like brain circuits firing. You have countless possible neurons that could fire in countless possible ways, which is not Buddhist scripture, but just to talk about it in a straightforward way. Countless possible synapses that could fire into any perception or of pain or pleasure or hallucination or reason or anything else, right? Same idea with karma, but at a more subtle level, at a more subtle energetic level, right? I mean, we are creating the system, the mind, which has a particular way of functioning because of its content, because of the way it's composed, because of what's in there. So, we put in all these like lousy energies and seeds and imprints, and then it functions that way as a lousy thing, as a lousy experience, as a lousy feeling, as a lousy thought, as a lousy reality, right? So that's why this is important, because we have to understand where our afflictions are coming from. And when one perceives ultimate reality directly, one sees directly where reality comes from and how perception works. And the fact that it is this way, the fact that one sees directly that one's own mind is the creator of one's reality. The energetic impulses, the karmic seeds, the way in which those energetic impulses and seeds ripen and configure and pop are our suffering, or our happiness, or our reality, etc., etc., etc. And so it's extremely important to understand that if we see ourselves yelling at someone, that we're collecting certain karmic seeds and latent energies which will configure our mind to experience being yelled at and have an unpleasant experience of sounds coming back at us, right? So that's how reality works, and one sees that directly in the experience of emptiness. Yeah. Did you want to say something?
No, I was just wondering if you could clarify, in respect to what you said, the difference between the sensory input, or the data that's received through the senses, and what perception is, as being two different things and not necessarily the same. Sometimes perception we just assume is what photons hitting our eyes.
Right.
And I think it's an important.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You know, I studied anatomy and physiology some years ago, and even in the medical textbooks, it's very interesting when you study the nervous system and the spinal column and the organs and neurons and how they work. It's like we assume that all of the data coming in through our senses is actually getting processed, right? But it isn't. The function of the spinal column and the base of the cerebral cortex is that it actually filters out about more than 90% of the neural impulses coming into the brain. So, 90% or more of the data that comes in through our senses, just at the level of the brain, doesn't even make it to the brain. It just gets screened out along the way. Now, which 90%? I mean, and why that 90%, not the other 90%? Why is it? You see what I mean? Even at that level. And it's very interesting to study if one starts to look into sort of the way in which the brain functions and memory functions and thought functions, even at the scientific level. When they study it, they say, well, the brain really doesn't have the capacity, just to speak about the brain, not the mind, make a distinction. The scientists say, well, the brain doesn't really have the capacity, it doesn't have the RAM to store all our experiences. Through brain imaging and whatnot, they say, well, the brain only stores major events. It can't store all the details associated with the events. And so anytime we have a memory, anytime we think about something, the way in which memory and imaging works, and it's been mapped, is that the brain accesses high points and then fills in. It's like, what's it fill in with? Where's it getting it? So even just at the scientific level, it's very interesting to think about how that's working even on a more gross level. And so when we talk about it on a more subtle level, even on the underlying subtle karmic energetic level, and we say, what is this subtle energy? What is the subtle, very subtle mind and energy which causes certain things to arise in a certain way at a particular point in time, in a particular way, in conjunction with other particular things? It's kind of boggles the mind, So we have a system here. So we have a system here, which has been presented to us by enlightened beings who can see, everything. That says, look, this is how it works. Like produces like. Whatever you put out is going to come back to you. Karma, that's karma. If you yell at somebody, you're going to be yelled at in the future in spades. If you treat somebody well, that's what's going to happen to you. That is how reality arises. That is how reality is created. That is how perception functions. And so the point of seeing emptiness and experiencing ultimate reality is that one is able to confirm that personally, firsthand. And so that's what we're talking about here is one says, oh, I'm in another realm, and I'm experiencing how reality works on a whole other level, on an ultimate level, and I see that everything is an expression of, my mind, and the configuration of my mind and all the infinite storehouse of energetic impulses and karmic seeds and what's configuring and arising and expressing at any particular point in time. And if I want to live as a being, if I want to perceive as a being which is happy all the time and blissful all the time, well, then I have to have a mind which is functioning that way. And how do I get a mind which is functioning that way? Well, I set it up and I configure it and I create it, in a particular way, just like you tinker toys or Legos or whatever you want to use. You put it together in a certain way and it functions in a certain way, and it works in that capacity. So that's really what we're talking about. So that we talk about nirvana and attaining nirvana. One understands, and through experiencing ultimate reality, one sees how reality truly works. One sees how perception truly works. One sees that reality is a function of perception. Perception is reality, right? My perception is my reality. Your perception is your reality. The bug's perception is the bug's reality, and on and on and on, right? There is no fixed reality. It's just a question of who is perceiving and how, right? From that particular vantage point. So if we understood this truly, then we would do nothing but virtue 24/7, right? I mean, if we really understood this and we really believed it and we really saw it, we'd be going around all day long saying, oh, let me do this because that's going to create my future paradise. Let me do that because that's going to create my future paradise. But we don't, right? We don't think that way. We don't live that way. We don't act that way, right? So, but attaining nirvana is reaching a state where we've eliminated all the negative imprints from our mind, all the negative impulses from our mind, right? And we have a mental continuum, which is nothing but virtuous impulses and seeds, right? And energies. So positive potentials. So no matter what happens, we have pleasure, right? There is no other possible outcome except that. We've gotten rid of all of our negative impulses, negative energies, negative karmic seeds. So understanding emptiness provides us with the ammunition to behave in a way to live as I just described. When a difficult situation comes up, to behave virtuously. We normally don't have the capacity. If somebody says to me, don't put your hand in the fire, it'll burn you. If I've never done it, I might try it just because, don't believe them or want to see. But, once I put my hand in the fire and I've gotten a nice burn, I'm never going to do it again, unless I'm seriously deranged or something. But in normal circumstance, you just wouldn't do it again, right? So it's the same thing with seeing emptiness. If I can tell you, oh, this is what Buddha said, and this is the deal, and this is how it really works at an ultimate level. If you do this, you'll cause your own suffering. You will suffer intensely if you do this. But haven't seen it directly, haven't done it directly. So when one has the experience of ultimate reality, it's like putting your hand in the fire. You know for a fact that if you do this, you will definitely, absolutely suffer in this way. You just don't do it. Like you wouldn't put your hand in the fire. And so that's the point of seeing emptiness. The point is like, I know for a fact that if I yell at somebody, it's going to suck for me. I'm just going to get yelled at a lot. And I know if I steal or I hurt somebody, I know for a fact I'm just doing it to myself. I may as well do it to myself 10 times over right now, because that's what's going to happen, or worse, or whatever. So that's the point of seeing emptiness directly, right? Is that it provides the capacity to make efforts in a concerted way to change our behavior, right? So that's why seeing emptiness directly is so important, because we know for a fact that's how things work, all right? And the scriptures are very clear in saying you cannot succeed, you cannot become enlightened, you cannot attain nirvana unless you see emptiness directly. Period. Impossible. It cannot be done. The human mind is not capable of being conscious enough and aware enough and thoughtful enough and disciplined enough to say, I'm going to be a good guy all day long. Can't do it. I can walk out this door saying, I'm going to be nice to everybody I meet. And I'm going to forget in about 10 minutes. And that's just the way it works. That's just how our mind functions. That's just the nature of our lives, right? And so that's why we have to have a direct perception of emptiness, is because it provides the power, the strength to actually change our behavior and to re-habituate. And that's why the fourth path, the path of habituation, is the natural continuation and progression of one's spiritual career. It's all about ultimate reality emptiness. So we start our career trying to be more virtuous, trying to clean up our act, trying to set conditions in place so that we can advance in our practice, and then we study higher things and higher reality and develop the capacities we need, and then we can experience ultimate reality. Then after you do that, that provides the rocket fuel to change your behavior. It's like, it's like the difference between like a match in the wind and rocket fuel, in terms of the effect upon one's life and one's behavior. My ability to consciously pay attention all day long, to make sure I'm virtuous all day long, is pretty small, After seeing ultimate reality, it's just like, no, I'm not going to put my hand in the fire. No, I'm not going to put my... It's like being surrounded by fire, No, I'm not going to put my hand in the fire. No, I'm not going to touch it. It's like that, And so that's the importance of the realization, right? Okay. So, we have about a gazillion previous lives, right? And we've collected karma from the infinite past, and all of it has to be cleaned out, right? I mean, we said nirvana is a state where you don't have any mental afflictions at all. Any negative imprint in our mind, right? Any negativity in our mind stream will eventually ripen into some kind of affliction, or problem, or suffering, right? So, our choices are to have all those past negativities ripen upon us into suffering, or to clean them up or damage them in some way, so that they don't ripen upon us, right? My preference would be not to have them ripen upon me. I mean, so it's very interesting, you hear some Buddhists say, well, it's okay that I'm suffering, it's my negative karma ripening, I'm cleaning up my negative karma, It's a good thing I'm cleaning up my negative karma. It's like, I don't want to clean up my negative karma that way, It's like, I'd rather have a nice other approach to karmic cleaning, thank you very much. It's like a physical seed, if you damage, if you have a physical seed which is damaged, and you plant it, and you can put all the water you want on it, give it all the sunlight you want, it's not going to grow much anything. You might get a little small contorted thing that comes up, but it's certainly not going to ripen into a full strong result, right? And so karmic seeds are the same way, So we have to destroy the negative karmic seeds so that we have a clean mind stream. Much preferable to having them ripen, purify them. Okay, so then what happens? So we have, we set out on the 5 paths, we go through the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. We sit down, we meditate, we see emptiness directly, right? We get out, we rehabituate, and then we attain nirvana, right? So then what? I'm still John, right? I mean, if I do it in this lifetime, I have this body, right? Is it a suffering body? Is it a nirvanic form of some kind? I mean, how does that work? I mean, how is it, if we're going to do it in one lifetime, how does it work? So, because, you might have a blissed out mind, but what about your body, right?
It still hurts, you see that you don't believe.
Yeah, I mean, you don't lose it right away. I mean, if I can attain nirvana in this lifetime, I'm doing it in this body, so I still have this body, which is the result of previous limited karmas, right? I mean, I was born as a human, the suffering human body that gets old and gets sick, and once the karma ripens, it's here, and it's still in force, if you will, until the karma wears out, right? I mean, every karma has a duration, every karma wears out. So the karmas which produce this body will eventually wear out. It's called death. I mean, we call, the karma of having this human body wearing out. We give it the name of death. And so, there will come a time, I mean, you could be in a room surrounded by lots of people who have attained nirvana or enlightenment in this lifetime, and you would never know it, right? I mean, they could be absolutely, blissed out in their mind in the same human body, right? And until the karma which produced this body wears out, they've got a blissed out mind and an ordinary human body. Now they're not suffering from it because their mind is incapable of feeling suffering, right? But it's still an ordinary human body, and it's still going to die when those karmas wear out. But death is not a painful process as an ordinary death would be, because they don't have any suffering seeds left, you see? And that's called nirvana with remainder. And I should probably give you Tibetan. Because, those of you who are doing your homework, there's that. So we're talking about different types of nirvana, and this is called Flakche Nyangde. Please say Flakche Nyangde. That's nirvana with something left over. It's nirvana with remainder. So it's a state where you still have your body, which is produced by impure karma, right? All right? So what's the difference between a body with something left over and a body with nothing left over? Sorry, say it again. What's the difference? What's the difference between nirvana with something left over and nirvana with nothing left over?
I'll guess that it's you're throwing karma into your next life. Is that right?
What would it be? Let's say it differently. We talked about nirvana with a remainder, which is you attain nirvana in this life. What is nirvana?
Permanent cessation of all mental affliction.
Yeah, you're just blissed out in your mind, never have any mental affliction ever again, right? Except that you got a residual lump of body left, right? That's your remainder. And then, what happens when the body dies? Well, then you have nirvana with no remainder, it's called.
Prana Nirvana? Prana Nirvana?
I don't know what prana nirvana is, but could be. Yeah, that's Sanskrit?
Yeah.
So, in Tibetan it's Hlakmen Yangde. Hlakche is something left over, and Hlakme is nothing left over. So it's a negation. So you don't have this human form anymore. You know, you attain nirvana where you're in a state of mental bliss all the time, and you're just kind of hanging out in your personal blissed out zone. You know, you no longer possess this suffering body, right? In Buddhism, and so there's no suffering, it's a permanent ceaseless state of bliss, right? Can you ever suffer again once you attain nirvana? Well, what would be a cause of suffering? Hurting someone, say. Engaging in negativity, say, right? So if one attains nirvana, could they suffer ever in the future? Only if they collect the karmic causes, right? I mean, anyone that collects the karmic cost to suffer can suffer and will suffer.
So not by definition, because it's the permanent cessation of all mental afflictions.
Yeah, good point. They're very precise in their definitions. Permanent cessation. Meaning that they have enough understanding and insight where it would be utterly stupid of them to ever do anything which would collect a negative karma, right?
Is it possible?
I don't know. I mean, if you stuck your hand in the fire and got a 3rd-degree burn, is it possible you do it again on purpose?
But if it's a permanent cessation, is it possible to go back on that?
I guess the short answer is no. Simply because afflictions are rooted in ignorance, right? So if you think about the nature of the mind and how one attains nirvana, when you experience emptiness, right, you cut the root of ignorance, you cut the root of wrong views and ignorance.
But it sounds kind of, by definition, that it's not a choice, it's the way it is.
Forced on you by your past
Yeah,
karma.
you can't.
Yeah, so, can we sit there and say, I choose to have these 3 trillion karmas ripen in this order?
Then you wouldn't be in nirvana.
Wait, don't you become
yeah.
outside of karma? Like karma stops applying once you achieve nirvana? Like karma is no longer a thing for you.
Well, they give it a different name. The principle is the same, and the laws of karma are all-inclusive and apply to everything. But they no longer refer to it as karma because karma has a connotation of being stained or dirty or tied up with, associated with negativity. So they give it a special name, but it's the same principle.
Do you want to, does that get tied up with that also, that part of the definition with the, it's like subsequent analysis? It's like also the nirvana comes only about after you, nirvana in the definition is also that you had the DPE and you had the understanding of the 4 Arya truths, so maybe that like ties up into why you wouldn't go back.
So you have to, I mean, if you think about, I think, say this, often we think of a spiritual path as like, I think people sometimes think of a spiritual path as something like a switch gets flipped. It's like we have a circuit breaker or something, or a toggle switch. I don't know, use whatever switch you want, right? You flip the switch, and like the switch is flipped, and then you're done. You can't go back, like the breaker's tripped, okay? But we're talking about a spiritual evolution, right? So when we're talking about spiritual evolution, and we're talking about going through the 5 paths, what are we talking about? We're talking about you start off really ignorant, and then over time you become less and less ignorant until you get to a point where you actually perceive ultimate reality and your ignorance is shattered, right? And then you got to spend, decades or however many lifetimes putting that into play and living it and engaging it and becoming that type of being such that you're functioning that way all the time. And then you attain nirvana and full enlightenment, right? So when we think of like, can you ever go back? Well, if you see emptiness directly, and you've like spent about 300 years like practicing being virtuous, like continuously, such that it's like a spontaneous impulse, and it's like the only thought that ever occurs to you, and you're like on the 10th boomy or something. Like, can you go back? I mean, I think the answer would have to be no, because at that point, all the
It's an interesting
seeds.
question, and I'm just sitting there being an Arya, or whatever, to go collect some negative karma.
Yeah, right. I think my point is as one evolves spiritually, I don't think the seeds can exist in one's mind stream somewhere along the way, wherever that is. I don't think the seeds can exist in one's mind stream such that they are capable of even asserting the impulse or the thought.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So it would be like, can you unlearn? Like,
Well, you are
the
unlearning.
seed-
That's exactly what you're doing.
But you're right, it is kind of like a switch then. If you've gotten that far,
In comparison to what you began with, you could say.
is
not
the
as
bridge
serious.
burned?
Or is there a tipping point? You know, where's the tipping
Yeah,
point,
can
right?
you not?
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
CP.
Not really a problem that we have to worry about.
Speak for
Our time would be better served learning to see emptiness.
Or meditating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if everything is empty in the sense that if you are blissed out,
Yeah.
even if you were to do something, I feel like even if you were to do something that may seem harmful from another perspective, if you're blissed out, how can you plant a seed of suffering if everything for you is bliss? Even if you were, for example, to yell at somebody for their, you know, for their own good or whatever it is, you know.
And that's one of the issues of certain high states of meditation. There are certain very high states of meditation where you're just kind of hanging out in a blissful meditation. And so, by virtue of meditating all day long in bliss, you're not collecting any negative karma, right? But you still have negative karma in your karma pocket, which will ripen. And so that's why this path of habituation is an active process of getting rid of all of your past negative karmic seeds, so you no longer have negative karmas in your karma pocket.
I think that this topic is addressed in the Diamond Sutra. When you're talking about realizing emptiness in the path of habituation, that's where you were thinking less karma, I shouldn't yell at somebody and all of that. When you get past that to nirvana, which you're describing as a complete sensation, in the Diamond Sutra goes this whole thing, no one ever is enlightened, because nobody ever is enlightened. And what they mean by that, from my understanding, is when you get to that point, there is no sense of self. There's no self, there's no being there that you would consider a self. So you can't create karma with the delusion of acting out of the self, that the self could benefit from not being hurt or harmed, because that self no longer exists to you. There's no difference between you and others. It's a very different place. So there's nothing to get.
But there's still the karma in the pocket.
That's taking it to a whole other level, which is like how does one define oneself and how does one relate to oneself if one doesn't have a limited ego and all the rest.
But that's where the true cessation, the permanent cessation, is in that. Because as soon as the self enters back into it, then you back into the cycle. You may be very high up on it, but you're not that permanent sensation. Then you're thinking, well, I shouldn't do this because I don't want to suffer later. And what you're talking about is the imprints, which are like the horse's footprints in the corral.
Yeah, I mean there are, as you were saying, there are bakchaks. Even when you're a very high bodhisattva, there are still dormant residual karmic seeds which are not finished. And so those seeds can never ripen. At a certain point, those seeds can never ripen. Even though you have dormant latent seeds, they can never ripen. And eventually, they're all finished and they're all clean. At which point, you're fully enlightened.
But presumably, there's those people that die and stay in spirit form and then reincarnate, right? So those, if they didn't achieve enlightenment, then they're still suffering in the spirit form. So in the spirit form, then you have different scale of, people, enlightened one, suffering souls. So maybe the enlightened one that wants to be of service, if he's in the spirit form, and maybe he's not much of a help, so maybe he chooses to reincarnate in a physical body to help, and therefore he will be tied to, again, forgetting the enlightenment processes went through, right?
Well, so when we speak about enlightenment, being fully enlightened, where you want to help others, the definition it's very specific, which is that one of the qualities of an enlightened being is they can see every moment of the past, present, and future simultaneously, all the time, and they know everything there is to know everywhere in all the universes and realms and beings, etc. So an enlightened being, a fully enlightened being who wants to help those in the spirit realm or animal realm or hell realm or what godly realm, whatever realm, would have the capacity to emanate form there or to help in whatever way is possible. Bruce, did you want to?
Yeah. If nirvana means that we arrive at an attenuated state, or a state that is so attenuated that we no longer have any boundary of self, therefore we lose the platform to commit this ignorant deed and that ignorant deed, then what is it which experiences the bliss of nirvana? Or who is it that experiences the bliss of nirvana? What's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Is that rhetorical?
If there's no self to commit folly, then there should be no self to experience bliss.
Is that a rhetorical question, or was it
It was a statement of doctrine.
Okay.
I pretend that I mean it as a question. So somebody can respond.
What does attenuated state mean?
It means you get so thinned out that yourself, the hard, massy thing that I think
Or
I am, that you
expanded.
think you are, which
Like
commits personal acts out of an abiding sense that there is a person.
That way it's gone.
Okay, if that is dissipated, as this gentleman was suggesting, attenuates, dissipates into nothing, then what is it that is the repository or the experiencer of bliss?
Maybe that doesn't matter, it just is bliss.
Yeah.
Just
But
is
like
bliss
you're
in-
utilizing.
Bliss is happening.
in the infinitive.
Yeah.
Well, then shouldn't I
Being
be
felt.
Well, then shouldn't I be feeling it now?
If you're like,
Have you ever been in a state of flow?
At my age, I'm never more than 15 minutes from. You meant metaphysical.
I don't know, that's it. But have you ever been in a state of flow? You just start experiencing, not aware of yourself, you're just out of
I
that.
have.
Define flow.
All right, Bruce, you're taking us a little too far afield there. I'm sorry.
Get me my medication. I think it's something that I would identify as a state of flow. I don't know if that implies that there has been a lapse of state of selfness.
Why not?
Well, it might be, but then I still have the same question. If selfness has lapsed, what is it that's experiencing bliss?
Doesn't make a difference, but if you experience
Now,
it.
that begs the question.
Well, I don't-
If bliss is a reportable event that is associated with nirvana, you got to tell me who or what is having the experience. Otherwise, the language means nothing.
If the answer that you get is awareness experiences, but then there's awareness and what's awareness, but that's the awareness,
So-
the pure awareness experiences.
So whereas myself was Bruce, now myself is something called awareness,
But you don't identify with it, it's just awareness.
then what makes it me?
Nothing, there's no me.
Then where's the me that was
It's
born?
Right?
Where's
But
the me
isn't
that
it
reports
not
to you
supposed to
I
be
have
able to
bliss?
be
That comes back into
articulated?
being when
It's
you...
only supposed to be experienced. Like putting words on it is limiting it.
Do you know what I think? I think this is a perfect time for a cookie break, and you can continue starting the break. Have a break and come back.
John, I feel a flow experience coming.